Welcome to the Water Resources Podcast. I'm your host, Bridget Scanlon, from the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas at Austin. This podcast is produced in partnership with the National Academy of Engineering. In this podcast, we discuss water challenges with leading experts. I would like to welcome Seifu Kebede, who has been a professor of hydrology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa since 2019. Seifu grew up in Ethiopia and received his bachelor's and master's in Addis Ababa and his PhD in France at the University of Avignon. He worked for many years at the Addis Ababa University, focusing on water issues in the Horn of Africa. Thank you so much, Seifu, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bridget, for inviting.
Right. So Seifu published a book titled Groundwater in Ethiopia by Springer, and a pretty comprehensive assessment of water resources in that region, almost 300 pages, very detailed hydrogeology, water resources, water chemistry data. And Seifu has been involved in projects with many different organizations over the years. The UK, DFID, International Atomic Energy Agency, World Bank, and many other groups. So Seifu, you recently attended the International Association of Hydrogeologists meeting in Cape Town in September, and you're currently serving as the Vice President of the regional chapter for Sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that meeting, and you gave a keynote address at the meeting, so maybe you can tell us some of the things that you learned from that meeting.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. Yes, the meeting was held recently in Cape Town, and there were about 500 participants. So it is the 50th annual Congress, and various groups of professionals, hydrogeologists, and financing agencies, and users, governments, and UN agencies have been represented there, and it was a great meeting. And the meeting started, the Congress started with an excursion into various groundwater systems in Cape Town, to see practical, on-ground evidence on the role of groundwater in, in serving humanity, maintaining, urban water needs. And yes, the Congress was, largely it focused on hydrogeology at various scales, from pore scale, measurement of recharge, new approaches of measuring recharge, to, global scale, connection between the groundwater systems and adjacent systems like marine systems. And so the scale issue has been addressed. Groundwater has been, dealt with at various scales. And then there are also, because of this new green transition and revival of the mining industry, I would say we have seen a few papers on mining and groundwater, both in terms of challenges of dewatering and, mining operations, to impacts of mining on the environmental systems. And yeah, it was such a successful Congress recently. I gave a keynote address, and my keynote address was trying to connect hydrogeology knowledge with use, and with, investment, and with people and environment, particularly with the context of Sub-Saharan Africa. So there is an aspiration in Sub-Saharan Africa and Africa in general to enhance its groundwater use from its current very low level, and overcome, local challenges of, socioeconomic challenges the region is facing. And then I was trying to highlight what is the evidence we have in terms of hydrogeology in Africa. Can we really achieve these ambitions, as also reflected in the World Bank report and other publications talking quite a lot of positivity around groundwater.
Well, it sounds like a great Congress. I wish I could have attended, and I guess it's very fitting that it was in Cape Town when they experienced almost day zero many years ago. So at that time, I think they were almost totally dependent on surface water, and since then have been trying to expand groundwater use. And I think one of the field trips was to Atlantis, which is north of Cape Town, where they have a managed aquifer recharge program where they take wastewater and other water and store it in the aquifer there for that region. So it's nice that they are expanding development of groundwater to provide a buffer to surface water, especially during droughts. So that was a nice aspect. And then it's great that you were able to bring all of the different groups together at the Congress, you know, not just the pure hydrogeologists, but also the people involved in financing, like the World Bank, and then other organizations involved in governance and trying to advance the role of groundwater in development in Africa. And I really appreciated you shared your PowerPoint with me and your keynote address emphasizing Jude Cobbing's work, Waking the Sleeping Giant, trying to advance groundwater use for development in Africa. So as you say, it's a very ambitious and difficult to do, because we've been trying to do this now for decades, but slowly, hopefully, making some progress. Much of your research, Seifu, has been involved in the Horn of Africa, which includes parts of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. And that region was subjected to about a 3-year drought linked to La Nina conditions and teleconnections with the Indian Ocean dipole. But now they're talking about upcoming El Nino conditions, and they're concerned about flooding. Maybe you can describe, you know, this problem with trying to manage these extremes, going from drought to flood, and then trying to provide secure water resources and food in that region, considering the context of those extremes.
Yes, Bridget, this is a very interesting question. Yes, the region is, you know, impacted or challenged by these extreme weather events, La Nina, El Nino. And then, yeah, as a result of this, you know, extremes, we see people being displaced in some instances, and then cattle dying, and people losing their you know, properties, particularly their cattle. The livelihood is mostly pastoralism in that region. And yeah, the region has been facing these challenges for a long time. And then with recent climate change, the problem is even more aggravated. And then that is when we think there is, you know, it's possible to overcome these challenges if the right decision and information is available. And one of the areas we are exploring is the groundwater system in the region. Can we use groundwater to sustain lives and also livelihoods? You know, cattle need water, and during emergencies like during droughts, you know, the immediate target is to save life and cattle, yeah, so that people do not lose their property and their livelihoods. So groundwater can serve that purpose of responding to emergencies of this sort. And during floods, if the flood is rightly managed, and then there is also a natural system through which the flood water is connected to the aquifers, and flooding by itself is not bad. The flooding becomes bad when we don't know how to manage it, and when people live on floodplains, on flooded areas. Nevertheless, flooding could also be an opportunity when you look at it from groundwater perspective. That is when most of these aquifers are recharged. And then that is why looking under our feet would kind of there is a silver lining there. So I'll put it that way.
Right. I mean, it's a pretty complex area with complex geology and topography and climate conditions. And so it's not for the faint of heart to try to explore for water resources and manage water resources in that region. So you have described in your book and many papers and everything, different systems. But in one of your recent book chapters in Global Groundwater Assessment, you showed that there are some areas with low-hanging fruit where it's possible to develop the groundwater more. You mentioned a number of different aquifers, Murti, Bulal, Awash, and many of these regions. And so I think it's great that they would be first lines that you could look at for water resources and emphasize those regions. Maybe you can describe those aquifers a little bit and some of the challenges with some of the others. I mean, the Rift Valley and some of the water quality issues and some of those others. So describing the hydrogeology, I know it's a very complex system, but maybe why some of these aquifers, you know, would be good targets for development.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. And considering also your listeners could be from other continents and not only from the Horn of Africa region, I'll try to make it lighter. Yes, it's a complex environment. It's mountainous, and the geology is relatively complex compared to other regions. And it is challenging in some places to look for you know, good aquifers that have larger storage, the transmissivity, and connected to sufficient recharge to you know, to sustain withdrawals. And then there are some strategic aquifers, I would say, in otherwise difficult environment. So I'm talking, when I say difficult environment, not the entire Horn of Africa is a difficult hydrogeology environment. These are particular corners of the Horn of Africa region, including Somalia and part of Kenya and part of Ethiopia, not everywhere. So the rest of the region has some good potential in terms of shallow groundwaters for productive uses. So the part I'm talking about is this challenged region, you know, towards the tip of the Horn of Africa. And nevertheless, we have these strategic aquifers that can be developed and also protected from both overexploitation and degradation in quality because of the way we manage the land use around these aquifers. One of the threats, for instance, on these aquifers is invasive species, invasive trees, pumping large volume of water into the atmosphere via the evapotranspiration pathway. And yes, protection of these strategic aquifers would be the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion. And also, you know, there are hard-won, you know, very good boreholes supplying a sufficient volume of water to communities. And then safeguarding this through innovations like monitoring, remote monitoring. There is a USAID financed innovation by the University of Colorado, I believe, whereby certain devices are fitted onto boreholes, and then the health of the boreholes can be monitored from several hundreds of kilometers away. And then if something happens to the borehole, maintenance team could be deployed to the site and maintain the borehole. And then safeguarding these boreholes, strategic boreholes. So in terms of emergencies, floods and droughts, then life continues and then livelihood continues, Bridget.
Right. And you mentioned that many people in these regions are pastoralists, and so cattle are very important to their livelihood. And so maintaining water resources for their cattle and their livestock and stuff is critical. And, you know, with a lot of emphasis on emergency management, I mean, you know, we go from droughts to floods and everything is an emergency. It's important, I think, to have a longer term sustainable development goals to manage these systems. And so it's very so some of these aquifers, you know, are complex, and you need deep boreholes to get at the water resource. But then there are other shallow systems that are more readily accessed. So, you know, you mentioned some of the solutions then, how, you know, monitoring the water resources so people can understand if the boreholes are functioning. And then if they're not, then they can fix them. And some organizations, like in one of your papers, you mentioned this group called Fundifix, you know, who can be deployed then and go out and try to fix the boreholes and make them operational. I think that's one of the big issues in Africa, is that a lot of the boreholes are not operational. And so trying to develop approaches where they can more readily fix them and maintain them. And you have published many papers on that issue with some of the people from the British Geological Survey. So I think that's a real challenge, isn't it? To maintain boreholes and maintain them operationally.
Yes, I think that's a problem all across sub-Saharan Africa, I would say, you know, functional boreholes. And yes, how to put it, but there are innovations, new innovations about how to deal with this functionality challenges. But the functionality problem arises from many different reasons. It could be because of borehole engineering, it could be because of the aquifer conditions, or it may be related to management, the way the water points are managed by community, by professional providers, etc. So recent innovation is growing both around how to properly site boreholes, and how to use good materials for the borehole design, and also on the management side, managing the water points. And this University of Oxford innovation on Fundifix is based on private-public partnership approach, whereby team of engineers or technicians come and join hands and together and form a local company, and financed by the public, the government, and also the users and philanthropists, etc. And then this group of technicians maintain several boreholes, and use the economy of scale to make to run this system into the future. And then this innovation is tested and is working, and can be upscaled in other parts of Africa, and with also considering local contexts. Yeah, yes, Bridget, back to you.
Right. And, you mentioned, we talked earlier about we go from drought to flood, and flooding is not necessarily bad because it supports recharging the aquifers. And your study in the Awash Basin really describes some of that. I mean, in many semi-arid regions, surface water recharges the groundwater, and so during flood conditions then you can get more recharge to the aquifer, and then that can support enhanced development during drought periods. And then there are also solutions like sand dams and other things where you can retain the water in these ephemeral streams for longer, so that it has a bigger chance to recharge the aquifer. So there are different ways then to try to optimize water management to even out the water supply variability during floods and droughts. You mentioned in one of your papers terracing, and to try to reduce erosion and those issues associated with flooding. So do you see a lot of areas where they deploy sand berms to increase recharge, and then a lot of siting of boreholes near these ephemeral streams to take advantage of that episodic recharge?
Yes, Bridget. Those strategic aquifers I've mentioned earlier, and most of these are recharged during exceptional rainfall events, during floods, and then floods suck into these aquifers. And then it has two advantages. One is in terms of water quantity, and also along these flood waters, where the flood water gets into the aquifers, that is when we get also fresher groundwater with low salinities. And yes, and the region also has some, progressive policy measures in terms of or practices in terms of land management. And there is a number of programs and projects on sustainable land management, whereby communities come out to the catchment and then construct soil water conservation structures. And recent research, again, collaborative research between my university, Addis Ababa University, and then the University of Oxford, has demonstrated that recharge to groundwater and the storage of groundwater can be enhanced, or has been enhanced. And communities which have done these practices have benefited, both in terms of use of groundwater for small-scale irrigation development and small-scale food production. And adjacent areas where you don't have those kind of practices are, not as well off as communities which have practiced these approaches. Yeah, ephemeral streams, recharging the aquifer, and then experience also on sand dams. I think Kenya is a good example. There are a number of places where sand dams have been constructed. Yeah, communities could do that. And then, yeah, this more or less somehow similar to managed aquifer recharge, but this is more locally, contextually applicable method in that region. There is a scope to enhance this and then to use sand dams as alternatives. Well, there is always externalities to or any engineering structures that we put in place. Nevertheless, there are demonstrations and evidences that sand dams could be a good options in some regions.
Right. And another thing that you mentioned is the lack of data, and you use the term survival bias in one of your papers, where, and I've heard this from a number of other people also, is that people don't report when they have dry wells, and they call them test wells or whatever, and you don't know where dry wells have been drilled, so that maybe you can avoid those areas, or you can learn from that experience, or where people have gotten high salinity groundwater or high fluoride water. And so we would really benefit from more comprehensive reporting that includes these failures, but we don't like to advertise negative things, do we? But it would be nice if the reporting would include, some of these ideas. So,
yes,
a lot of, Do you have some ideas on that? Or, it's just difficult to get those data?
Yeah. Yes, I think the way data is captured and circulated in a certain part of the world is maybe unique to that part. In the Horn of Africa, recently we made a survey, the way data is captured and circulated and shared. Peer-to-peer, people-to-people data sharing kind of dominates over centralized data through which everybody get access to the data set and then use that data. One way of getting handle on data that is not reported is to talk to people who are involved in drilling. And then professional organizations like our association or local associations, drillers associations, is where you can capture data on these unreported boreholes. And well, it is not always gloomy, but there are ways, to capture this data, and that is what I've tried to, look into in the Horn of Africa region, talking to people, looking into the gray literature, and success rate, evidence on success rate, drilling success rate was kind of captured. But yeah, we also recently did some survey to see if there has been any change. I would say success rate is improving, and because of new evidence and new information, use of hydrogeology maps, use of data, the use of satellite technology, etc., drilling success rate is reportedly among the community, hydrogeology community in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa region, reportedly it is increasing. And thanks to investment on knowledge and data gathering.
And so, you know, in a lot of cases, it's non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and other groups who are involved in drilling boreholes and stuff. And they certainly won't have the level of expertise that you do, Seifu, on the hydrogeology of the region. So they could benefit from an understanding of what's feasible and what's not. And I think you have been trying to translate your detailed work to something that's more readily accessible to these groups and to other people through maps and other reports. And I really like those. So we've had the Germans produced hydrogeology maps of global hydrogeology maps, and then the British Geological Survey, Alan MacDonald and others developed maps of Africa, the aquifers, and tried to characterize them at a very large scale. But then the types of maps that you're talking about that you shared with me are like whether it's diggable, whether you could have a dug well or a borehole, and you know, maybe you can describe some of these, and then some reports like how far apart you should have your wells if you want to irrigate with a certain amount of water for smallholder irrigation projects, and how deep you should have the well to store some water. Maybe you can describe some of these, Seifu.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. That is another very important, very good question. You know, the last decade, we have known in Africa many different maps at Pan-African scale being published by partner organizations. And these maps have really led the planning, you know, continental scale planning, and I would say policy making. And nowadays, you'll see several sub-Saharan African countries and African countries adding groundwater into their security mix, the water security mix. And then the city of Cape Town is an evidence for that. You know, the city of Cape Town kind of investing on groundwater and going to draw up to 150,000 meter cube per day and adding that into the city's water supply system. And then aspirations on groundwater is rising thanks to these maps which have produced evidence at continental scale. Nevertheless, you know, converting these, you know, ambitions as well as evidence into real action on the ground among farmers would need, you know, huge capacity, you know, trained manpower, hydrogeologists, vehicles, drilling rigs. You know, the scale of capacity that is required to realize Africa's ambition on groundwater is huge. So what path to follow? So one way to go is to go by farmers-driven approach. Farmers doing their own survey of the groundwater and digging boreholes or digging hand dug wells or manual boreholes into the ground, and then monitoring their groundwater systems, and then placing rightly, you know, distance between you know, hand dug wells. This is like hydrogeology made easy, or making the Darcy equation more made easy locally. And then what we have been trying to do at local level for the Agricultural Transformation Agricultural Transformation Agency in Ethiopia is developing tools and guidelines that are understandable to farmers and extension agents or development agents to use, and then drive sustainable use of groundwater for minor and small scale food production. And yes, I think you were asking about this spacing tool, catchment sizing tool, and hand dug well depths, water column tool. So these tools are, to irrigate 1 hectare of land, what is the water column requirement in a dug well? So this will help the farmer to design his dug well, led by, also supported by the extension agent. So that is a way to overcome the huge capacity need to realize what the governments, African states are aspiring, and also what financing agencies are kind of trying to support.
Right. And I think this follows on. I had an earlier podcast with Paul Bowman, where he works with people in Uganda and other regions, the local people, and helps them figure out where best to site wells using surface geophysics and to interpret the geophysics, and then to drill the boreholes themselves, hand dug wells, and then to monitor them and maintain them. And so this, I think the World Bank has a group called Farmer-Led Irrigation Development, FLID, which supports the stakeholder involvement. And it seems if they are integrally involved in the development of the resource, then they're in a much better position to manage it and maintain it and understand the dynamics. So it won't be voodoo to them. They will be involved with drilling and all of that. And so I think it will help them manage the resource a lot better. So it's a challenge. But I think you mentioned earlier that the recent World Bank report and what they're doing with farmer-led irrigation development and emphasizing groundwater development for economic growth and stuff. I think these are all parts of this issue and trying to achieve some of the aspirational goals that you want for sub-Saharan Africa. One of the things that you mentioned recently in a discussion, Seifu, was these pockmarked depressions at the land surface, and that they seem to be associated with underlying groundwater resource, and that some groups are developing these, and we don't know that much about them, and that we really need to understand them better so that we could protect them and manage them appropriately. But these pockmarks seem to be over large areas. Can you describe these a little bit and what you think needs to be done to develop them appropriately?
Yes, I came first across this pockmark depressions while I was trying to assist the USGS project in that part of the world, and I've made some survey of passive seismic in the depressions, and I made survey of maybe 2 or 3 such depressions. And then recently in 2021, a group of German scientists have published a paper on fairy circles in Namibia. And these were like tiny, small circular features around which the circle is defined by grasses. And then looks like very intriguing. And because of that experience in the Horn of Africa region, I say, oh, that part of the world has also these circular depressions, but it's different from what we see in Namibia. The ones we see in Ethiopia, Somalia are larger, kilometric scale, and these ones are like a metric scale. And then I wondered, why don't I look across the African scale, and I realized that they are almost everywhere in dry land environments. And then I was trying to put together a paper, and then we recently presented an abstract at the IAH on these pockmarks, and also realized that other groups of people are working on this. And then I saw a recent publication on pockmarks. They call it still fairy circles, and they're extant globally, worldwide, in Australia and Africa. And then what I was trying to look into is the hydrological significance of these larger pockmarks that we have in the Horn of Africa region, and following up on the work I started with USGS. And then these depressions are, serving like a perched groundwater system, but they are very vital water systems. People can dig hundreds of wells and then fetch water from hundreds of wells. In otherwise, very deep groundwater area. The regional water table is like 200 meters. And in these pockmark depressions, in some of these pockmark depressions, you have very shallow groundwaters and serving cattle, camels, people, water trucks. And then these pockmark depressions are attracting, small urban congregations around the depressions. And then visually, or in naked eyes, are not really visible. Not unless you closely see it, is not visible. But the local people know about these features. They call them bali. In Somali language, it's called bali. Bali to mean belly, so. Yes, I've been looking into the hydrological significance of these features, and in some places they are being compromised, being damaged because of settlements around these features, contamination, and then compaction of the recharge surfaces. And then that is the kind of things that we need to quickly protect from further damage. And these are vital water systems that has not been recognized in the past, but more evidence is needed. We are just at the starting stage to understand these features. We need more research, hydrogeological research on this. And I think if there are finances funding interested in funding, then we'll be happy to continue researching these vital water systems, and particularly creating also awareness among development partners operating in that region, so as to better protect and safeguard the system for sustainable use.
Right. I had never heard of them before, but as you say, they're very subtle and so difficult to see on the ground, but you can see them in Google Maps and stuff. You can see these sort of circular features, but then understanding the hydrologic implications of these, how deep is the groundwater, how widespread, and then to manage the resource. So I think geophysics, and you always use geochemistry to understand them and see quite distinctive geochemistry within and outside them. And then as people become more aware of these, then to try to avoid overexploitation and to manage them appropriately. So that would be great. They could be a real resource, in areas where otherwise the groundwater is a couple of 100 meters deep. And so you would only be able to drill a borehole that depth for maybe a larger scale development or something, So it's a very interesting area, and look forward to learning more about them and trying to see how they can be developed.
Yeah, then let's see if there are any interested parties on this, and make further exploration. And recently, in collaboration with UNICEF, UNDP, we gathered some data on isotopes in waters, in this region, to look into carbon-14, tritium, stable isotopes of water. There is clear evidence that these depressions serve as recharge areas containing perched groundwaters. And nevertheless, we need to explore this further. When you look into the age indicators, tritium and carbon-14, we felt that some more additional age indicators would be needed, maybe possible chloride 36 or noble gases, or other age indicators may be needed to really understand the groundwater dynamics in that part of the world.
Right. And I mean, in the High Plains region in the US, where we've done quite a bit of work, we have these features, circular features called playas. And early on in the early 1950s and 60s, they thought they were groundwater discharge zones, but then later realized that they were recharge features. And then there was some concern because municipal waste and Department of Energy waste was being disposed, thinking that they were not recharge features. So there was some remediation. But so that's the primary place for recharge in the Southern High Plains are these playas. So if these features are somewhat similar, maybe they may serve a similar role. You've been in South Africa now for a few years, and do you think that there's the situation, the groundwater situation in South Africa is quite different from that in East Africa or the Horn of Africa? Seems like South Africa relies fairly heavily on surface water resources, and maybe there's opportunities for further development of groundwater resources, and maybe then since they have surface water, maybe they could conjunctively manage surface water and groundwater to optimize water resources. What are your thoughts about South Africa, Seifu?
Yes, I think as you rightly said, South Africa is heavily surface water dependent, and groundwater accounts for less than 20%. Yeah, this is just a rough estimation. The exact number may be different, but less than 20% of the water supply, both for domestic use, industrial, irrigation, etc. And because of historical reasons, and South Africa is heavily surface water dependent. But the 2015-2016 El Nino has taught the hard way that conjunctive use is an inevitable path because of that day zero Cape Town has encountered. And then there is no guarantee that the other part of South Africa will not face the Cape Town situation. And then the government and also Water Research Commission has rightly identified, to scale research on groundwater recently, and in the coming 5 years, which is a right choice in my opinion. And we need to look into how to add groundwater into the water security mix here in South Africa to overcome the upcoming challenges, climate challenges, and human pressure. And in the Horn of Africa region, you're right, like in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, maybe with different degree or differences, you see heavy reliance on groundwater, particularly for drinking water supply. And then agriculture is still rain-fed largely, but we see pockets of emerging groundwater dependent irrigation, farmers-led locally. Not really like I don't have the right term to that for that. Is it cherry something? Yeah, cherry is a small thing. Yeah, maybe correct my English later. So it's very small scale, but showing that this can easily be quickly catch the attention of the other nearby farmers, and then groundwater can develop very quickly among, can be uptaken by farmers very quickly. So yeah, there are differences. We see heavy groundwater reliance for drinking water supply in Horn of Africa region, and in South Africa it is more of surface water reliance, but moving also into adding groundwater into the mix. But there are also differences, like we have the SADC GMI, which is a very mature organization that is coordinating the countries on managing the shared aquifers and non-shared aquifers as well, I believe. And in the Horn of Africa region and other regions of Africa, including the Niger, Sahel region, the institutions for collaborative management are yet to be developed, and data sharing, particularly data is there. That is my belief. Data is somewhere, and that data which is sitting somewhere in a black box the missing link is bringing this to light and then using this evidence for decision making. So in that regard, other part of Africa is falling behind compared to Southern Africa or South Africa.
Right. So I think it seems like they're advancing with governance and approaches in Southern Africa. You mentioned SADC, Groundwater Management Institute, GMI, SADC, South Africa, Southern Africa. What does SADC stand
South
for?
Africa Development Community.
Development Community, Groundwater Management Institute. Yeah. So that's great. And then there is concern, I guess, in some regions of South Africa, Southern Africa, about conserving wetlands and not having groundwater development impact wetlands. And there are some very famous Ramsar sites. And so is that a concern in many regions or just in localized areas where those wetlands are found?
Let me see this through the, through recent, I call it recent direction on connection between protected environments, conservation areas, and groundwater. I think globally, the past experience is that the boundaries of conservation areas and protected environments, wetlands, Ramsar sites, is based on the surface water catchment. I think that is the way it is, boundaries, protection areas are delineated. It happens so, particularly in drier, arid regions, in many tectonically affected regions, the boundaries of surface water and groundwater doesn't match all the time. And then in this regard, there may be an interest. I think there is a recent publication on that. I don't remember the name right now, on demonstrating the, if groundwaters were factored into the delineation of protection area, it could have been different from the experiences or the practices that many countries are doing currently in terms of protecting these vital systems and Ramsar sites, etc. So I view this issue in South Africa from this angle. And in South Africa, we have many protected environments, conservation areas, and these wetland systems, Ramsar sites. And evidence is needed on these systems and how they are connected to adjacent groundwaters. If we are aspiring, enhancing, groundwater use for irrigation development and for other purposes, then, we will need to also safeguard connected systems, connected social systems, connected ecological systems. And so in that regard, again, further research is needed, and we are trying our best to understand the wetland systems in the catchment where my university is located currently.
Great.
So,
and
University of KwaZulu-Natal Center for Water Resources Research. Yeah.
Right. So, Seifu, you've done a tremendous amount of work in much of it in the Horn of Africa, now in Southern Africa, and you're serving as the Vice President for the International Association of Hydrogeologists chapter. How do you see groundwater development evolving in the near future? Are you hopeful that we will be able to advance at the smallholder farmers, help them secure drinking water supplies and small-scale irrigation to support food production and food security, and to try to manage these droughts and floods that we're continually subjected to? How do you see it evolving?
Yes. So, Bridget, Africa is a very huge continent. Yeah. For our readers, Africa has the size of the US, China, India, and Europe. I think, combined, and it's a huge continent. So we have variabilities in hydrology. And then if you look into Africa, that is underlain by what we call basement rocks, basement aquifers. And yeah, by some coincidence, most of these basement aquifers also have high rainfall conditions, rainfall varying between 500 millimeters to up to 1,500 millimeters. And then these basement aquifers have, shallow regoliths, underlain by intact rocks, and most of the groundwater is circulating in the shallow level. Yeah, this may not be appropriate for the kind of irrigations that we see in California or in Ogallala or in other places, but small scale farmers led, half a hectare, 1 hectare land, that kind of thing can be is feasible and it's possible. Yeah, for instance, if you look into this what we call depressions inside, not the depressions, not the pockmarks I've talked about, but the depressions between hills in basement aquifer areas, also locally called damboos. They are very extensive. And then and also boreholes in basement aquifers. Average yield could be, if rightly cited, according to a recent paper by Bianchi, 2023, I suppose, shows borehole yield could be a borehole yield of 0.5 liter per second could be achieved in this environment. So comparing the area, taking the the borehole yield, and yeah, there is a possibility, for enhancing groundwater use for, food production and drinking water supply. Well, nevertheless, there are also people who are concerned about this, because of, wetlands going to be impacted, or connected ecosystems may be impacted because of this shallow groundwater development for use. And then every country is unique, every region is unique, and then countries have their own aspirations, and then their sequencing of, what they want to do, and creating awareness about sustainability, but at the same time also, creating awareness about possibility of using this for local food production. It could be, yes, a good option and a viable option in the future, I believe. Yeah.
Right. I think Alan MacDonald mentioned that these basement aquifers represent about 40% of the land area in sub-Saharan Africa. And the World Bank, in their aquifer typology, they use an egg carton approach to suggest that these are small localized systems that are sort of self-regulating. And so there's not a lot of storage to overexploit. And so maybe these would be ideal then to support smallholder drinking water supplies and small scale irrigation. And I think, the maps that you have been developing, translating your detailed hydrogeology to very simple maps, and then the things you have been developing about borehole spacing and depths and all that to support this are very valuable to help translate this to the farmers, and hopefully that they can take it on. Our guest today is Seifu Kebede, who is a professor of hydrology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And on the website, I will include links to many of his book and his papers and other sources that we mentioned today. Thank you so much, Seifu, for talking with me today and sharing your knowledge, and for all the great work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bridget, for inviting, and I was happy talking to you. Thank you so much.